You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. Today we're talking with a cardiac specialist in nuclear medicine who has made women her priority. Also with us on a return visit is a professor of environmental climate justice issues. And last, we speak with a woman who escaped from a brutalizing arranged Orthodox Jewish marriage and established a safety net for other women across cultural boundaries. Wow! But first, we need to look inside the headlines. Today we're going inside the headlines of a front-page story in the New York Times on Friday, May 29th, bylined by Carlotta Gall. It's about women who were tortured and violated in Tunisia and then shamed on top of it. Tunisia, as you may have noticed, is going through what South Africa went through very courageously. The country has established a Truth and Dignity Commission, which has begun public hearings with the goal of exposing the violations that were made during 6 decades of abuses under 2 dictatorships before the still fragile revolution. The interesting thing is that there is a tone of shock, both by the reporter and by what she is reporting, which was surprise by the long-time human rights community and activists in Tunisia, surprise at the number of women starting to tell stories of extreme cruelty, sexual violence, and rape. These are by far the most difficult and traumatic cases because women are seen in this conservative society to embody family honor. So whatever happens to them must be their fault. There is this amazing cross-cultural perception of women as being all-powerful. So whatever atrocities happen to us, we must have somehow invited. It's an astonishment. In any event, unsurprisingly to women's movements in Tunisia and around the world, women were tortured as brutally as men were, but they suffered additional stigma of rape and sexual assault. And they were themselves, in many cases, completely innocent. It was only because of their relationship with a man that the state was interested in. In some few other cases, they were themselves activists, leftists, nationalists, unionists, students, feminists, Islamists, and they were arrested alongside their male colleagues. But after waterboarding and electrocution and beatings and rape, the women also suffered miscarriages and lasting internal injuries that have left them psychologically scarred. Some live still enthralled to their torturers, whom they see every day in their neighborhoods. We had this paradox, one of them said, a former journalist and human rights activist, Sihem Ben-Sedrine, who leads the Truth and Dignity Commission. She said that both dictatorships under Bourguiba and Ben Ali vaunted policies that led the Arab world in supposedly advancing women's rights. So Ben Ali, she said, did a lot of feminization, but there were massive violations against women, especially rape, more than we had thought. There's a famous case that has now come before the commission. The woman, a mother of 4 and the wife of an Islamist activist who was so tortured and raped with a wooden stick and received such serious injuries that she has been in a psychiatric hospital ever since, and her physical incapacity is rated at 70%. Now, what is astonishing to me is that this is astonishing to anybody. The same was true in South Africa. The same was true any time data has come forth about torture. The same is true today. It's just that what happens to women happens in the private realm. It happens off stage. It gets less attention. It never makes it to the headlines, where if it bleeds, it leads. Why We Can't Wait, the recent initiative from African American women and other women of color about President Obama's Our Brother's Keeper program, kept pointing out, but what about the women? Why isn't it our children's keepers? This goes on and on and on. It's the invisible alternate reality in which women live, and it has to stop. And now for my first guest, Dr. Jennifer Mieres, but that's spelled Mieres. Mieres. Dr. Mieres is a nuclear cardiologist, and she is a specialist on women and heart disease as well. Some time ago, she published a book, Heart Smart for African American Women and Latinas. She is the executive producer and energy behind a PBS documentary, RX, The Quiet Revolution, which began airing in April, and she is an energy center all in herself. She looks into the heart of things, yours and mine. Dr. Jennifer Mieres. Jennifer, Dr. Mieres, welcome to Women's Media Center Live.
Hello, Robin. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you today.
Last year, you did a Huffington Post piece that became quite popular about how in health matters we have got to place women and women's concerns so often ignored, not listened to, overlooked. Instead, how they need to be at the center. And you've done this in your specialty, women's cardiovascular disease, and explored how treatment and diagnosis is different for women versus men. And you've done it in your books. And how did this come about? How did you get started on this trajectory?
Well, Robin, I have been in the practice of cardiology for over 20 years and actually got inspired to become a cardiologist when I was in medical school by Dr. Alice Jacobs, who then became a president of the American Heart Association. And because there weren't that many women in cardiology, but she convinced me it was a worthwhile field. And then I moved to New York after Boston University for medical school. I moved to New York to do my residency at St. Luke's Roosevelt and met an amazing researcher, another woman, Dr. Judith Hochman. And Dr. Hochman inspired me to become more curious. And we were seeing at the ER, the emergency room in St. Luke's, that women were coming in with symptoms that were not classic, so we didn't make a diagnosis of heart disease. And as a result of that, women were not eligible for all of the life-saving strategies we had. And so women had a worse prognosis. They came in later with their symptoms that were not classic, didn't get diagnosed in a timely fashion, and ultimately had worse outcomes compared to the men who came into the emergency room with the classic sort of elephant sitting on the chest.
Right.
And
but
so
the interesting thing to me is that classic is men became the generic. Men were and then women were just other. So because women present differently, they don't there's no pain necessarily radiating down the left arm, all that. Women were ignored.
Well said, absolutely. And so, as one of my colleagues said, if you were to take an aspirin, which we know works well in the setting of a heart attack, and you were to give it to a man and say, this has been studied in women only, would they take it, right? And so, the same analogy was made. We were lumped together with men, ignoring completely all of the biological differences that exist with women, and ignoring the fact that can have an impact on how we develop heart disease.
Yes, well, gender-specific medicine is now beginning to make waves across all health fields, I think. And it's important for men as well as for women, because women are not just small men. We have different needs, and we react differently to medications, to our symptoms are sometimes different in many diseases, in many health problems. And then, of course, that can also be compounded when ethnicity gets involved. Your book, Heart Smart for African American Women and Latinas, and their increased risk of heart disease, is a very important and interesting topic.
And, the sort of desire to write this book came from seeing many of my patients of different ethnicities who would show up, especially African American women and Latino women, who would show up late in the game with risk factors such as hypertension and diabetes that were not treated. And I'm a big believer and, sort of on this mission of getting people to be partners in their health. And I think a lot of it, if you're not aware of the risk factors, if you're not aware of your family history, if you don't understand what's going on in your own body, by the time you seek help sometimes, a lot of damage has been done.
Right.
And so raising awareness that yes, heart disease is an equal opportunity killer, equal for all men and all women, that across our lifespan, we as women will develop heart disease. And then honing in on the fact, increasing the awareness in the African American and Latina community was sort of the impetus for writing this book, to say yes, heart disease is there. It starts early in life silently. It's sort of the silent killer. But the good thing is it can be prevented. So early knowledge and recognition is really important.
Oh, you're wonderful. I wish there were more like you. You also are talking about this participatory patient in so many other ways as well. Talk about the PBS documentary, of which you are the executive producer, together with 10-time Emmy winner David Grubin, The Quiet Revolution, which started airing in April.
Yes. So about 4 years ago, when I sort of hung up my stethoscope for a little bit and joined the North Shore IJ Health System to become the first Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, also being in charge of women's health, the Women's Health Institute, the idea of having a media platform to empower people, and especially empower all people to be partners in the health, because we as a country move away from, hospital care, focusing on sick care, seeing people at the end stages of diseases, to really moving into prevention. The idea of coming up with a partnership with the media to bring this message forward was sort of formed about 4 years ago. I went to David Grubin and some of my colleagues, Dr. Terry Parnell, Joe Cabral, and Dr. Andy Eleanor from Harvard. We partnered, formed a steering committee, and felt that we would highlight the areas of the country where communities were taking healthcare into their own hands, where people were partnering with their nurse practitioners, their physicians, physical therapists, and taking an active role in their health, and then becoming ambassadors to spread the education about health and prevention to their community members. And so RX, The Quiet Revolution, was formed. Happy to say that after 4 years, it's now a reality. And when you see it, you will see communities, especially we have a community we highlight 4 communities, a community in Mississippi where the community members have to drive over 50 miles or more to even get health care, to get to a health clinic, where the University of Mississippi and the state of Mississippi have partnered to sort of control diabetes and eradicate diabetes, because it's rampant there, and it's a pretty much African-American community in many of the rural areas, and they have come up with a great idea of using iPads. iPads to educate in a very health literate way, so that even if you have a 3rd grade education, you could understand what diabetes is, and to help help you choose what you should eat, what you should do in terms of activity, and control your blood sugar on a daily basis. And it's a pretty powerful message where you see this partnership.
Wow. It's just fantastic. And then another community is in Maine, and another community is in San Francisco's Chinatown. That's the nursing home alternative. And one is in Alaska.
Yes.
Those are the 4 communities that you are this Renaissance woman doing 50 things at once and doing them all superbly. Do you still practice at all? Do you have any time to practice?
No, I've unfortunately had to, I said put my stethoscope, hang it up for a little bit, but planning to get back into practicing probably later this year in the area of cardiac rehabilitation for women. We're going to open a cardiac rehab center for women. Women, we have heart attacks, we get ignored, we do not go to rehab, and all the studies show the great benefits of support groups and cardiac rehab, especially for women after they've suffered a cardiac event. So we're going to be opening one as part of the Katz Institute for Women's Health, and that's where I'm going to re-enter the clinical world.
Wow.
I still do consults. Lots of consults.
Right.
People call me for second and third opinions.
Well, you've been practicing though. It's just that you're healing the country, the entire country.
That's a great way of looking at it. I like that.
You're
yes.
changing consciousness, and addressing needs. So you've got your really big stethoscope there.
Thank you. It's a good way of looking at it.
Jennifer, give the blog address so that people can follow your blog if they have the address.
So I think that, part of what I do and part of being in the LinkedIn community, I've written a few blogs, one about heart disease to empower people to sort of get the simple steps that they could learn about heart disease, and also wrote a blog about the 5 R's, the 5 important things in life, rest, relaxation, release, reset, and reboot, because very often we could use a reboot. I also wrote a blog about the power of partnership, getting friends and family involved as you start your heart health journey. And then my recent blog was about the documentary, Advocating for Person-Centered Care and Health, and you can reach it on linkedin.com/pub/Dr. Jennifer H. Mieres. I think that anyone who just Googles Dr. Jennifer Mieres LinkedIn, it will bring you directly to the blog.
And listener, Mieres is spelled Mieres.
Yes, thank you.
Mieres. So you are just wonderful. Thank you so much for this work that you're doing for all of our health, and for shaking things up in the establishment. And thank you for being with us today on Women's Media Center Live. Thank you, Jennifer.
And thank you, Robin, for empowering us all women to go forth unafraid and help, with world healing and empowerment for all women.
It's time to take a short break here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I'll be right back with Carmen Gonzalez, who will tell us the one thing that would make the most difference in terms of environmental climate change and environmental justice. And it's something that directly impacts on women. Don't go away.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back. My next guest, Carmen Gonzalez, has been with us before. She is a professor of law at Seattle University Law School, where she teaches international and national environmental law. She was a Fulbright scholar. She has taught or worked on environmental law projects in Latin America, the former Soviet Union, and China. Oh, her creds just go on and on. She's a member of the Board of Trustees of Earth Justice, and she has served as a member and vice chair of the International Subcommittee of the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, which is an advisory body to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. She holds a BA in political science from Yale and a JD from Harvard Law School. Carmen Gonzalez. Carmen, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
First of all, you have a new book coming out, and I think not until July, but still a very important book on environment. Tell us the name and about it.
The book is called International Environmental Law and the Global South, and it's going to be published by Cambridge University Press this July. What the book tries to do is to look at the major environmental problems that we're confronting currently, look at them in historical context and from the perspective of developing countries in order to bridge what I call the North-South divide, the misunderstandings and inability to reach an agreement between developed and developing countries.
This is so important because it's completely understandable why developing countries say, how come we are not supposed to have cars or refrigerators or air conditioners just because you guys up there have screwed up the whole planet? We would like the good life too. And then the North turns around and says, in effect, no, it's time now that we've gummed up everything for you to make up the difference. I know that your work in general is focused on the underlying political and economic causes of both local and global environmental degradation, and its hideous, special, disparate impact on indigenous peoples and poor people and ethnic minorities and women and all the have-nots. So talk about that.
Well, I think one of the problems that we often encounter when talking about climate change, for example, but also other environmental problems, is that they're looked at in very technical ways. We talk about caps and carbon taxes. These are fundamentally justice issues. These are issues that exacerbate north-south inequality, the inequality between developed and developing countries. These are issues that have a disparate impact on the most vulnerable, socially and economically subordinated communities, including women, children, indigenous peoples. And I think that reframing that discussion as a justice issue is a way that will touch people's hearts and make them understand how important it is for all of us to take action, because we're near a tipping point on issues like climate change. We don't have a lot of time before the changes become irreversible.
I know. And I would add in that there's another basic thing that's being missed, which is just connecting the simple dots themselves. And this is where media is falling down, because when, for example, the newscasters and the weather reporters this past winter talked about New England and New York and the whole eastern seaboard having the severest winter on record and sub-zero temperatures and so forth, did they ever say this is connected, or even ask the question, is this connected to climate change? No, they never did. In a separate story, they would talk about such treaty being negotiated off in Vienna or in Tokyo or someplace else, but they didn't connect the dots. And I think it's very important for people locally, wherever they are, to be reminded, since the deniers are so vocal, to be reminded that A, this is happening at all, and then B, the causes for it, and that to reposition it as a social justice issue, I think, is profoundly important.
It's hugely important, and sometimes part of the problem is the misnomer. I use the term climate change as opposed to global warming because what it is a disruption in the climate.
Yes.
Some places become colder, some places become warmer. There are all sorts of unanticipated patterns that essentially wreak havoc on human beings.
Yes. Well, and also if you say global warming, then you give an opening to morons like the congressman who brought a snowball into the House, or was it the Senate? I can't remember. I blocked it, to say, look, they talk about global warming and it's snowing in Washington, so they must be wrong. Oh, my God.
And what the media doesn't report is that we have a consensus among hundreds of scientists who are part of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. These scientists have now spent decades reviewing the scientific evidence, and they've come out and said what few scientists will say, that this is unequivocal.
Yes. Yeah.
And yet we still see denial in the United States.
Well, it's like the people who say, well, there are two sides to every story. And I respond and say, well, except where there's scientific evidence. Like, for example, there are not two sides to the story that the earth is not flat. So it's an amazement to me. And of course it's political. I mean, it's a way to shore up the status quo. You do a great deal of work on the food chain and the global food system, and how that's impacting on vulnerable populations, and what crisis this will be for the entire planet if it's not addressed very soon. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, one of the major consequences of climate change is going to be a decline in food production. And the areas that are going to be especially hard hit are the areas that are prone to drought, that will get even drier. Areas that will experience flooding that will disrupt agricultural production. Mm-hmm. And with the acidification of the oceans, what we can expect is a drastic decline in the planet's fisheries, which are already in crisis. Yeah. So this is going to be a phenomenally disastrous for food production, and those that are, again, most affected are going to be those who rely on the planet's ecosystems for their subsistence and their survival, or who rely on markets, and then prices are going to skyrocket, and the poor are going to be cut out.
Of course. So we don't all go away psychotically depressed. Help, Carmen, help. Just say some of the things that can be done and should be done, or hopefully even in a couple of instances might already being done, that will address this.
Well, one of the most important things is for the U.S. to come and take a strong position in the climate change negotiations that will be occurring in Paris in December 2015. This is the end of the line. This is the deadline that has been set to negotiate a successor to the Kyoto Protocol, which should go into effect, be negotiated in 2015, go into effect in 2020, and the idea is that every country of the world will have a commitment. The commitments will differ because the contributions to climate change are very different. So that's hugely important. But in order to be able to take a credible position, the U.S. has to do something domestically, which it hasn't done, which is to pass legislation. The Obama administration has done what it can using existing statutes and regulatory authorities, but there's a need for so much more. There are also opportunities that are being missed that are not on the table that I think need to be on the table. One of these is the problem of energy poverty and facilitating the transition to renewable energy in the global south. Ironically, some of the people who will be most affected by climate change are the 3 billion people who currently have no access to reliable electricity. So the people who are making the smallest contribution to climate change are the same people who are most vulnerable to its effects.
Oh, my God.
And yet we're missing opportunities to solve two problems at the same time. One of the most powerful contributors to climate change is black carbon, the soot that is released when people burn animal manure, dried animal manure, and wood for cooking facilities, for heat.
Right.
And this black carbon, which is what the 3 billion poorest in the world rely upon, poses immediate threats to human health. The women who cook the food, inside the home and are using dung and wood suffer from all sorts of respiratory problems, resulting in deaths among women and children of about 4 million a year.
Wow.
But this black carbon, when it goes into the atmosphere, exacerbates global warming. And yet, unlike carbon dioxide, which resides in the atmosphere for 100, perhaps 1,000 years, if we substitute clean sources of energy for this black carbon, within a week, the effect dissipates. It is gone within a week. It resides in the atmosphere for a really short amount of time. So what this means is if we decide that it makes to go forward and invest in providing clean, renewable technology to the global south, we can buy ourselves more time to prevent the tipping point from happening, more time to negotiate the long-term changes that need to be happening in every country to reduce fossil fuel emissions, to have them peak in 2015 and essentially end by 2050. So this is an opportunity that has not been seized upon that could make a huge difference right now in the lives of the world's poorest people, while at the same time having an immense impact on the climate.
Wow, that is stunning. And it also, let me just connect a dot here for a moment and see what you think of it. When Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, and since then, of course, some of the guys have said, oh, well, she dealt with only small bore issues. In other words, she did not solve the Middle East, not that anybody else has, but now it's her fault. But still, among the things they considered small bore issues was her arranging for 10 million smokeless stoves for women in villages in the global south. Because the women, and with her it was a health issue because the women, of course, had high rates of emphysema, of you name it. But there was, I'm just suddenly connecting a dot and realizing that's also hugely an environmental issue. And it was called small bore.
And this is only the beginning. The cook stoves make an enormous difference. 4 million deaths a year among women and children. That is huge.
Massive.
And then there are other things that can be done. There are all sorts of technologies that are immediately available, that are sustainable, that can connect people, that can provide people decentralized access to electricity. In other words, solar, wind, local biodiesel, so that you don't have to try to connect people in rural areas to the electric grid, which is totally cost prohibitive,
Yep.
and you don't tie them to the existing fossil fuel-based energy system. Instead, what you're doing is leapfrogging to the next level, to renewables and to local control over these renewables, so that you're actually giving people control over their own lives rather than making them more dependent on elites in far-flung urban destinations.
Wow. Wow, do I wish that you had the power to set environmental policy for this country and the world. It would be a very different place, Carmen. Anyway, we've run out of time. Say the name of the book again.
It's International Environmental Law and the Global South, and it will be published this July.
And she also, of course, is the author of a number of other books, Presumed Incompetent, a stunning book that first came to my attention when the first time you were on the program, about women of color in the grind of academia. And she's a professor of law as well. So you are something, capital E else, Carmen. Thank you so much for coming back and being with us, and do so many times again.
Thank you, Robin.
And now it's time for the Surrealism Corner. There's a website called informationisbeautiful.net. Informationisbeautiful.net, which is quite lovely and which has amazing factoids. Some of which you knew and most of which you didn't know. And these are, in many cases, misapprehensions, myths that get out there and gain credence simply by repetition. So here is the undoing of a few of those. You can find lots more at informationisbeautiful.net. Missing persons reports. No, police do not demand a 24-hour period before accepting a missing persons report. Dogs sweat by salivating. No, they regulate temperature through panting. They actually sweat through footpads. Bats are blind. Bats can not only see, they can also use echolocation, which is why they're so awesome. Einstein failed mathematics. No, he did not. He failed an entrance exam for a school, but he still excelled in mathematics. Here's one. We have 5 senses. Actually, we have close to 20, including balance, pain, movement, hunger, thirst, etc. Here's another one. Yes, I'm a cop. U.S. undercover police do not have to identify themselves as cops. This is a Hollywood-induced myth. Here's one. Shaving thickens hair. No, regrown hair is not thicker, or coarser, or darker. It just appears so because it's no longer tapered. Aha! Only 10% of the brain, you know that one, that we use only 10% of our brains. Misunderstood metaphor. Proportion of our brain firing is task dependent. Ultimately, all cells are important. The 3 wise men, nowhere in the New Testament does it specify that there were 3. Could have been 1, 2, 50. Milk increases mucus. We all have thought that one. No, it just straight doesn't. There's no need to avoid dairy products if you have a cold. Salty water boils quicker, while adding a sprinkle of salt to fresh water makes no difference. Huge sea level amounts do make a difference. That's something that if you were going to boil the ocean, you should know about. Anyway, there's lots more of these basic ones like Satan does not rule hell. It doesn't actually say this anywhere in the Bible. And complex ones like goldfish, who we think of as having a 3-second memory. While they're not the smartest pancake in the stack, they boast a memory span of 3 months, which is better than many politicians. So you can go to informationisbeautiful.net and find some information that is precisely that. It's time for another short pause here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, but I'll be right back with the woman who first saved herself and then went on to save other women.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And we're back again. Have you ever wondered what is the reality of women in Orthodox Jewish arranged marriages, or for that matter, in any arranged marriages? My next guest is Fraidy Reiss, and she is a woman who was in such a marriage, who freed herself, but didn't stop there. Here she is in all her glory of helping women cross-culturally. Fraidy, welcome to Women's Media Center Live.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you for having me.
You're doing amazing work. The story of how Unchained at Last came to be is a personal story, isn't it? Because it was your story. Tell us a bit about that story, and then how you came to found this very useful network of women.
Yeah, so it is a very personal story. It came out of my own personal traumatic experience escaping from an abusive arranged marriage right here in the U.S. And my process of getting out was so difficult. And in fact, my entire family and community shunned me and my two daughters after I finally made it out after a 15-year abusive marriage, that I decided, I made it. I managed to get out. I need to help other women do the same thing. And that's why I started Unchained at Last.
And your community was which community?
I was raised in the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community.
Uh-huh.
And, of course, in that community, they don't call it arranged marriage. They don't call it forced marriage. They just call it marriage. It was the way I always understood marriage to be, and it didn't occur to me until I was deep into it. In fact, probably until after I left, just how little choice I had getting into that marriage as a teenager. And then started realizing as I left that very insular community and started making friends with people from other communities, that this is a problem that affects women in many, many different communities, and it's here in the U.S. and across the world.
Yes, it's extraordinary. I mean, and what's wonderful is that when you began organizing, once you got out of the arranged marriage and managed to get a divorce, you created Unchained at Last, but you did so, as it were, interdenominationally, because it's almost all of the 90 women that the organization has helped have been pressured into marriage by their religious community, even though their religion may or may not require arranged marriage, but custom does. But that includes Orthodox Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Mormon, Unification Church as well. And the women's nations of origin stretch through Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia. That's extraordinary that you operate in the intersection between the modern concept of marriage for love, secular, between consenting adults, and this antique ethnic or communal custom of arranged marriage. But say about some of the things that Unchained at Last does. I know you provide legal services, but you do a lot more, don't you?
Yeah, so when we first started, my idea was I knew that one of the great needs that I had when I was getting out of my marriage was a divorce attorney. So my first thought when I started Unchained was we'll help women get a divorce attorney. But it soon became clear that women need so much more than that, and we're talking about women and girls. Some of them, by the way, are not yet in a marriage when they come to us, but they're facing a marriage. Their family is trying to pressure them or force them into a marriage, and they need help resisting that. But the help that they need is often just really recreating their entire lives. Many times their families, their communities have shunned them. They are where I was when I first left. And sometimes they've grown up in insular communities and don't know much about the outside world. Although that is not always the case. That was the case for me. But often they need emotional support. Well, not often. Always they need emotional support, but often they need psychotherapy, career counseling. Financial coaching is so important. A lot of these women, they're adult women, very intelligent women. They've never had their own checking account. They've never had their own credit card. So just figuring that out, they need help with. Often there are various financial needs, and we have women who escape with nothing, and they need an entire wardrobe.
Right.
We have women who are transitioning from a domestic violence shelter into their own apartment for the first time, and they need furniture. So there are some financial needs. We help them with all of that.
And of course, there's child custody as well. If there are children, then that's a whole additional fight, isn't it?
Absolutely, child custody. So even when it comes to legal matters, what we soon realized was divorce is not the only legal issue that a lot of these women and girls have. So domestic violence, almost all of our clients are, and by the way, we have more than 90 already, almost all of them are domestic violence survivors. Immigration is a great need as well, immigration law attorneys, because many of our clients have been brought over to the U.S. from overseas as part of an arranged and forced marriage and do not have legal status. And of course, that's a huge problem for them in terms of moving forward with their lives and rebuilding their lives. So we get them immigration law help as well. And then any other legal needs that arise when we've had, individual circumstances where, a landlord-tenant lawyer was needed for somebody being unfairly evicted or other similar situations.
I bet you must have your share of threatening letters from husbands and families.
So far we've never received any threatening letters from a specific family. I've received unpleasant letters from anonymous people saying what you're doing is terrible, you're breaking up families, that sort of thing. But for the most part, the women that we work with, we're very discreet and we keep our clients' information, so close, and we're so careful with that. But I think for the most part, the husbands and the families of our clients don't even know that these women are unchained clients.
Wow, that's so you keep good security. The way a battered woman's shelter keeps its address, very quiet. So
exactly
for security reasons. Wow. And you yourself, when you were beginning to realize your marriage was not what you wanted, you were harassed. There was stalking. There were death threats there, and all of it finally you documented in court papers.
Yes, that's correct. And the threats, and especially because remember when I was leaving my marriage, I was also at the same time leaving the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community. And that's a very insular community where lately it's become a little bit more common for people to leave, although still so few people leave that community. And back then it was much, much less common. Even fewer people left. And there were, unfortunately, some people who took it upon themselves to threaten me, including some community leaders, to threaten me with various things.
My God.
All of which I, took to the police and, did whatever I could to protect myself.
Fraidy, a lot of women, it used to be that they blamed battered women or women in a bad situation. They blamed the victim. And, of course, the women's movement never does that and understands it. But nonetheless, it is extremely unusual that you not only fought back as an individual, hopefully the day is coming when that will be less unusual, but that you went on then to found an organization. What inspired you? What gave you the guts to stand up to the whole community in which your entire life had been spent?
People ask me that often. So, my sisters, my friends, everyone that I knew for the first 32 years of my life, they're all still there. Many of them are in unhappy marriages. Many of them are in abusive marriages, worse than mine. What is it that made me stand up and say, I am leaving, I'm not doing this anymore? And all those women stayed. I don't know the answer to that. Perhaps there's something wrong with me.
Oh, I think there's everything right with you, my dear. I think it's wrong with them. You have built this. You kept this going. You founded this and started it with an annual budget that wasn't quite $20,000, which you yourself earned and funded the organization for, and it now has a $3.4 million budget, with about $200,000 in donations from individuals and foundations and $3.2 million in free services from participating lawyers. You are one hell of a great organizer, Fraidy. While we're at it, give the website so that people can find out more about Unchained at Last and can donate if they choose and support it in any possible way.
Oh, thank you. Yes, we rely very much on the kindness of people who care. The website is unchainedatlast.org. And what you said just now is very kind, and I appreciate that. But when you think about it, $3.2 million in pro bono legal and psychotherapy services, you can't give me the credit for that. There are some of the largest law firms in the world represent Unchained clients for free. There are some individual lawyers who are, running their own business and have many, many things going on, but still take the time to represent untrained clients. And they represent the clients as if they're paying top dollar. Many of them, or I would say most of them, treat their clients better than my attorney treated me when I was getting divorced, and I was paying my attorney $450 an hour.
Wow.
And then we have some medium-sized firms. So, I appreciate your kind words, but really the thank you goes to these incredible volunteers. And it's not only lawyers and psychotherapists. I mean, we have a team of more than 250 volunteers. We have a volunteer who does our social media coordination. We had a volunteer last year who helped us to pass the legislation that we passed in New Jersey. She just took it on as her project. We have people who help us plan our annual fundraisers. I mean, we have extraordinary volunteers. For a long time, I was a volunteer myself, but as of the beginning of 2015, Untrained is able to pay me a small stipend, although it's still not a full salary, and I still do have a full-time job on the side.
Wow, you are something else. Well, I think all of these volunteers are magnificent, but it does not detract from what I said earlier. As far as I'm concerned, it's still, they wouldn't be on board if you hadn't hooked them in the heart, pursued them, convinced them, raised their consciousness the way you're doing with us right now. So I retract none of my praise for you in adding praise for them. I do want you to talk just for a minute. We're beginning to run out of time, but just for a minute or so. I know that not long ago you took part in an initial planning session with the White House Council on Women and Girls to help them develop a national policy on forced marriage. I take it there is no such policy? That's appalling.
Yes, it is appalling, and it was wonderful to see the Tahoe Justice Center, which is a national group based in the D.C. area, organize this initial meeting with the White House Council on Women and Girls. And so we're finally advocates from across the U.S. who work on forced marriage issues joined and really urged a national action plan. So currently there are very few laws and policies in place in the U.S. that can be used to punish or to prevent a forced marriage. And we're leaving behind a lot of our allies around the world and other countries that have really been much more proactive and progressive in terms of addressing forced marriage.
Yeah, I'm sure most Americans would be shocked and will be shocked to learn that this can still go on in their country, like FGM or a lot of other things that goes on right here at home. So, bravissima for your work. And again, the website is unchainedAtLast.org. You can learn more about it there and learn more about the remarkable person who is Fraidy Reiss. Fraidy, thank you so much for your work for women and also for being with us today on Women's Media Center Live. Thank you.
And thank you for everything you do for women.
One last brief pause here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I'll return in just a second or two with some fighting words.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And we're back just in time for some fighting words. As you probably know, the Supreme Court has reversed the conviction of a Pennsylvania man who posted violent messages on Facebook and claimed that they were therapeutic and not true threats. He had been arrested by the FBI, which had been monitoring his posts, and he had begun posting violent messages to his wife after she had left him in 2010. The messages prompted her to get a state protection order against him and led his bosses to fire him from his job at an amusement park. And a lower court to which he claimed he was simply reposting rap lyrics and messages from Eminem and asserting his First Amendment rights, convicted him on those accounts, and he was sentenced to more than 3 years in prison. But he sought a stricter standard than the one the jury had been instructed to consider. He sought a standard that included his state of mind, whether he had meant to issue a true threat. And on Monday, the Supreme Court of the United States agreed with him, calling his threats online musings. And the justices returned the case to the lower court for further proceedings. Here is an example of his postings. Fold up your protection from abuse order and put it in your pocket. Is it thick enough to stop a bullet? Try to enforce an order that was improperly granted in the first place. Methinks the judge needs an education on true threat jurisprudence, and prison time will just add zeros to my settlement. And if worse comes to worse, I've got enough explosives to take care of the state police and the sheriff's department. Isn't he special? Now, in a lopsided vote, Chief Justice Roberts, who wrote the majority opinion, was joined by Justices Scalia, Kennedy, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Stephen Breyer, Sonia Sotomayor, and Elena Kagan. Alito concurred in part and dissented in part, and only Clarence Thomas dissented. Can you imagine how weird it feels for me to find myself in agreement with Alito and Thomas? I mean, it's amazing. Alito faulted the majority for providing only a partial answer, which is to say the least. That's an understatement. And Thomas said that the failure to decide throws everyone from appellate judges to everyday Facebook users into a state of uncertainty. That's a gross understatement. Roberts, in the major opinion, said that at trial, Ilonis testified that his posts emulated the rap lyrics of Eminem, some of which involved fantasies about killing his wife. In Ilonis's view, he had posted nothing that hadn't been said already. So, the government did present as witnesses the wife and her co-workers, all of whom said they felt afraid and viewed his posts as serious threats. Alito, of course, said it's only a partial answer. This is really shocking, and it shows the misunderstanding. I'm sorry for the arrogance of this statement, but the misunderstanding of the court, including the women justices of the First Amendment, and the state of permanent fear in which it sticks women, and the state of, what the hell, I'll say what I want and do what I want and let the chips fall where they may, especially on women, that it is the message that it sends to abusive partners and to people who stalk and to angry guys who are rejected for dates, who think it's just okay to, post hate. It's just okay to post hate as much as you want. And women probably like it. It'll show you how intense you are in your feelings from them. Arguably, this makes things worse, much worse. At the absolute minimum, it certainly doesn't improve things. It's a shocking decision. We'll return to this issue in greater depth in future episodes, but for the meanwhile, be careful of those online musings because they can get you killed. And that's it for today. This program is syndicated, but if you can't find the broadcast on a radio station in your area, you can always visit us at WMClive.com and get the show plus the archive of all the previous episodes. And you can find us at iTunes worldwide, where you can stream, download, and even subscribe to the show's podcast. Also, be sure to find WMC Live on Facebook and on Twitter. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Opinions expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. WMC President and Executive Producer of this program, Julie Burton. Senior Producer, Crystal Williams Chancellor. And our founding sponsor, Regina K. Scully. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. The last straw this week is that former governor of New York, George Pataki, has added his name to the What Me Worry list of Republican presidential contenders. As a New Yorker, I can tell you, gales of laughter, fits of mirth, roll on the floor, clutch your ribs, catch your breath hilarity. His utter ineptitude is hard to forget. But don't you forget to join us next week right here on Women's Media Center Live.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, tune your radio to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on WMCLive.com. Talk radio with a brain.